and you're very welcome to the Health Research Podcast, where today we're marking Rare Disease Day. We're going to be talking about rare disease research and also the lived experience of people who are affected by rare disease. I'm your host, Dr. Claire O'Connell, and in this series, we explore how research and evidence can help shape better policies for the benefit of everyone, for service users, communities, and societies at large. We're joined today by three wonderful experts, and before we hear from them, let's just set the scene with a couple of startling numbers about rare diseases. So we know that there are several thousand rare diseases. Between 6,000 and 8,000 have been identified, and more are being discovered all the time. And these diseases are often chronic, which means they're there for life. They are often progressive, which means that they get more severe over time, and they can really affect the quality of a person's life. And that has wider effects rippling out into the family as well. And as to how many people actually have rare diseases, well, it turns out that it's not rare to have a rare disease. Around the world, approximately 300 million people live with a rare disease, including as many as 36 million people in Europe and 300,000 people in Ireland. That means that the number of people in Ireland living with a rare disease could fill Croke Park to capacity more than 3.5 times over. So it's quite likely that everybody listening to this podcast at least knows someone with a rare disease. And today we're joined by three expert guests who have different perspectives on rare diseases. Dr. Avril Kennan is with us. Avril trained as a geneticist, and today she is Chief Executive of Health Research Charities Ireland, which represents patient-focused charities working to improve lives and influence research in areas such as rare disease. We're also joined by the Chief Executive of the HRB, Dr. Gráinne Gorman, who's a consultant neurologist, and Gráinne can bring a clinical lens to this topic. And Gavin Lawler, HRB Programme Manager and Co-ordinator of the Irish National Mirror Group on Rare Diseases, is with us too. And Gavin, you can bring us up to date on all the latest developments in rare diseases in research in Ireland and at EU level, and plenty more besides. So everyone, you're very welcome to the podcast. And let's start with the clinician on our panel, Gráinne. Can you talk us through what exactly a rare disease is from a clinical and scientific perspective?
Well, in Europe, we define a rare disease as affecting fewer than 5 in 10,000 people. And as you eloquently said, Claire, that with more than 6,000 conditions out there, they are more common than you might think. And what gives me hope is how fast our understanding is starting to grow. There is momentum and the pace of discovery is accelerating. But for that person and that family dealing with that, sometimes there's a real sense of isolation. And that leads us into, well, why is it difficult to diagnose and manage these conditions? And I think some of that is sometimes their presentation can be quite vague or overlapping with other conditions. So when you ask a family who's carrying around for years their folders, their medical notes, having to repeat their story, trying to join the dots is perhaps at the minute quite often what they're looking for. You know, often people assume the other clinicians think everyone's looking for a cure, but I rarely hear that. What I hear is about quality of life, not having to repeat my story, that people understand. So there's a lot to be done from when the allied health profession, the clinicians are in medical school, that we make them more informed, right through when you sit in front of your GP to get to the specialist, that there's a better understanding of what rare disease is.
Right, so it's that total picture for the individual who is one of very few with that specific disease, but it means that their journey through the healthcare system can be a bit more convoluted and delayed sometimes. I suppose in terms of doing the research to try and improve, how we diagnose and meet the needs of people who have rare diseases, what's the challenge there from a research perspective? Because when it comes to clinical and scientific research, part of the power of a study is that you have a lot of people involved. But if there aren't a lot of people with a rare disease, say in an individual country, how do researchers get over this?
So international collaboration is vital, because what you're doing is you're opening the door to additional knowledge, to more patients, larger data sets, more cohort. but also for that person who feels isolated, a potential opportunity to speak to somebody else. Our systems, all our health systems, doesn't matter where you are in the globe, are because of here, GDPR, but whatever you call that regulator, quite often is actually a barrier to allowing people to speak to someone else with a condition. And often when you have it, you feel so isolated. And I think our mission is to, how do we connect the dots, not just from a science perspective? What's quite eloquent about the mission of the HRB, we're doing research with people, not to them. And remembering that whatever we do, whatever research or wherever our culture goes, I think the biggest barrier sometimes is forgetting that. And I think if we all try and join the dots and we all move together, often science competes, culture is to compete. But actually when it comes to rare diseases, desperately need everybody to unite and walk together.
Right, the collaboration is key. And
Absolutely.
Internationally, in order to connect people who may be sort of few in number in one location, but globally there's a larger cohort. Yeah, very good, very good. Avril, I suppose, can you give us a little bit more of a sense of what having a rare disease means to those affected by it? I mean, you'll have insight from this from the Health Research Charities Ireland member charities. And obviously I appreciate while specific rare diseases may differ, are there sort of common elements and practical realities that face people with rare diseases and their families?
Yeah, a good percentage of our member charities do represent people with rare diseases. And so it's something that is a constant focus of our work. Gráinne talked about the isolation. I think that is such a perfect word to describe many of the experiences that are across all rare diseases. And what that can look like is starting with diagnosis. So Rare Diseases Ireland have done some work that show that more than a third of people with a rare disease take more than 5 years to get a diagnosis. So you can imagine that really, really high stakes. This is your health, maybe your life. Or your child's life, and then it might take 5 years or more in some cases to get the answers that you need. And it's they call it the diagnostic odyssey because it involves people traipsing around to different professionals like Gráinne talked about, and so much time that goes into that, and then even with the diagnosis, you can often end up in a position where maybe there's no expertise in the area. Often there is. Thankfully, we do have a lot of strong experts in Ireland, but many times there's not. And often no treatments, and only very rarely something that would come close to a cure. So huge impact for people on their daily life as well, in terms of needing to give up work in some cases, the constant time investment to manage your own care in many ways.
Yeah, absolutely. And I can imagine if the expertise that you or your family member needs is not close to you, there's the added, I suppose, financial considerations of having maybe to move somewhere else as well to get that expertise, which is very difficult. So the diagnostic odyssey, that's a good way of putting it, and it can take 5 years. My goodness. I suppose, Gavin, there is a lot going on to support patients and their families. And for instance, in Ireland, we have a new rare disease research strategy that was launched in the last 6 months or so. Can you tell us a little bit more about that?
Yes, so the HRB was one of the members of the steering group, and the steering group contained all the key stakeholders that were involved. So particularly, as Avril and Gráinne both highlighted, people with lived experience were one of the stakeholders, and they gave really good lived experience about what happened with their care, how it could be improved, and things that could be really implemented to improve their journey. So it has 11 key recommendations across the whole care spectrum. So it's from diagnosis through to managing pathways and treatments. But what's key for us in the HRB is there's a dedicated research chapter. So it's the first time that's been recognised how important rare disease research is, and as Gráinne said, that international collaboration perspective. So in the research chapter, there's 4 key recommendations, and one of them is having a national rare disease research group. And why they're doing that is it's similar to what they've done in cancer. It's getting all the key stakeholders around the table together to make sure that we're coordinating effectively, that we're not duplicating efforts, and that we're really streamlining and concentrating on getting things progressed for international rare disease research.
Brilliant. That's great. Yeah, that sounds like huge progress.
It is. So the other thing is it recommends improving our access to clinical trials, and that's something we're really passionate in the HRB as well. We've invested into the Rare Disease Clinical Trials Network, and the purpose of that is to improve access and also to scope out what things we need to do in Ireland to improve the delivery of clinical trials. And it feeds into the wider government efforts as regards National Clinical Trials Oversight Group and recommendations to improve that delivery as well.
That's brilliant. And I mean, I mentioned at the top of the programme that everybody probably knows someone with a rare disease. And that hits close to home for me because a few years ago, our son developed a very, very rare immune reaction to something. His immune system kind of went a bit rogue. And thankfully, he was diagnosed in time and was put on a protocol that was developed through clinical research back in sort of the 1990s and 2000s. And thankfully, he responded to it and he's flying now, not a bother. And I talked to you about this with his permission. He's fine with everybody knowing about it. But it had one of the hardest to pronounce names, hemophagocytic lymphohistiocytosis. I can tell you it took me a few goes to, to say HLH for short. But you know, it was a very scary time for us as a family. And thankfully he got diagnosed in a relatively short time. And there was a treatment for him, but that treatment came from research. And I remember emailing the chap who led the research in the Karolinska and just thanking him for his work because, you know, unless researchers are doing that work, then patients and their families are so, you know, they just need it so much. They need it so much. So yeah, I'm all for more research into rare diseases. And I suppose, Gavin, maybe you can fill us in on how the HRB is supporting the strategy. You know, what kind of programs or what kind of supports are there for researchers who want to do research into these diseases?
Yeah, this is something the HRB recognises as a massive area of need, and it's something we've invested heavily in over the last number of years. So we've invested about 20 million into rare disease research to support it, and we've particular schemes. So across our schemes, we're funding different rare disease research projects that have come in, but individual aspects is the Rare Disease Catalyst Award. So this is a specific grant that's worth €3 million and it's over 3 years. What it actually does is it unites a group of 3 universities, 5 hospitals and also patient organisations. So the Rare Disease Ireland are represented and they're the National Rare Disease Patient Alliance. And what they're trying to do is they're trying to make sure that research in Ireland can be done more effectively and also connect internationally with other initiatives such as the European Rare Disease Research Alliance.
So Gavin, we spoke about the importance of international research. How can we make sure that people can collaborate at a European level?
It is really important. So internationally, it's recognised how important it is in rare diseases specifically. But what we've done in the HRB is ensured Ireland is represented by participating in the European Rare Disease Research Alliance, so ERDRA. What ERDRA is, it's a European initiative where it's worth €380 million and 150 of that is coming directly from the European Commission to encourage international collaboration across Europe, but also outside of Europe as well. The rest of the money is made up by national funders such as the HRB, and it's a huge representation of different organisations. There's 37 countries involved in the ERDRA partnership with 180 different organisations, including national funding agencies, research performing organisations, and also actual patient organisations and research infrastructures, which is key. So it's really bringing everyone together to really work and focus on what's needed for rare disease research and collaboration. And that's where the HRB role comes into play because we're connected directly on some of the work packages themselves, but also funding things like the Rare Disease Catalyst Award. And that's connecting directly on some of the work packages and making sure that Ireland is represented, but also patients in Ireland are getting access to the different treatments, to different initiatives and what's happening. So one of the perspectives and things that happens at ERDRA is they fund what's called joint transnational calls. So these are multi-million euro calls where different countries agree to participate, and the HRB has participated in the last number of years. What they actually involve is pick a specific area of need. So for example, last year it was looking at early career research and small molecule research for rare diseases and how they can be used in biologics. And what happened was it was about 200 applications across the EU with different partnerships. To apply, you have to be a country uniting with 4 or 5 other countries, come up with your research project, including lived experience of patients. That's central to the application as well and how it's going to benefit them, and it goes into a central pot then to be evaluated. What's happened with the latest round is that there is 18 projects funded, of which 2 of them are actually containing researchers in Ireland, which is a huge benefit to the patients in Ireland. And we're actually doing better year on year with our applications to these initiatives. So it's showing that Ireland is actually engaged, and we have the patient population and we have the relevance, but it is important that we have that actual access to those areas so that Irish researchers and patients can get the benefit of it.
That's fantastic. That's so encouraging to hear that Irish patients and researchers can link in with these collaborative networks in Europe. As you say, it gives the patients access to the new treatments and the best that research can offer as well as creating more of an expertise as well among the Irish research community in rare diseases. Fantastic. I suppose there is a big push in the EU now to understand more about genomics, so DNA, and obviously, genomics and genetics are often central to rare diseases. I think most rare diseases involve some genetic or genomic element, about 70% of them, I understand. So I suppose maybe, Gráinne, you could explain to us why it's so important that, we're part of this EU push for genomics and better understanding in the context of rare diseases.
I think we're really at a precipice where Ireland has a huge opportunity to lean into Europe, and particularly around genomics, not just because it's our background like Avril and myself. I think, when Gavin was speaking so eloquently, the opportunities we have, it goes beyond science. It's around common standards. It's around common care, making sure we have registries, making sure we learn and speed up everything that we're doing. Genomics are foundational. They really bring clarity to diagnosis. They often help you predict complications. As clinicians, we see a pattern, but it does help us predict what might happen. Even in the absence of treatment and cures, it does help us guide and support the family on the journey. And increasingly, it is starting to guide treatment, which is lovely to see in the research field. So the hopeful part is how quickly the technology is improving. The key is ensuring our systems are connected so we can use it and use it well. So from my perspective, being able to compare a patient's genome with large data sets can really transform interpretation, but really back to that individual, hopefully uncertainty becomes insight.
Yeah, absolutely. Avril, maybe if you want to add to that from your perspective, what does a genetic diagnosis, or the lack of it, mean in practical terms?
Yeah, so many families get a diagnosis without that genetic element, but it does add a layer of depth to the diagnosis, which can be really helpful, maybe to know what subtype you have, maybe for family planning purposes. Also that piece around access to clinical trials. So I worked in a rare disease patient organisation before, and the fact that not everybody had a genetic diagnosis was absolutely a barrier to them being invited to participate in clinical trials, which can then open up access to treatments and so on. So there's, many benefits to having that information.
So does that mean that if somebody maybe has a genetic diagnosis, they can then be put on a type of registry, or they can become eligible for clinical research? Is that how it works, maybe?
Yeah, so they'd probably be in a registry even without it, if there was a registry.
Okay,
that's a whole other story.
Okay.
But often, if it's a pharma company, for example, running the clinical trial, they're often in rare diseases, running them internationally, and they're looking for particular subtypes of a condition that they feel that their particular treatment may be able to help.
Right.
So without having that exact information, it can be a barrier.
Okay.
Sometimes they themselves will go ahead and do a genetic diagnosis, but that takes time, and companies don't like that.
Sure. So if we know where the patients are who might be able to benefit from a trial, they're able to kind of get matched with that trial through that more granular genetic diagnosis. Wow, okay. Gráinne, how would having those kind of data systems that you mentioned, those connected data systems with the information about the patients and with the genetic diagnoses where available, how would that change kind of the frontline medicine of treating and helping people with rare disease?
I suppose what this really does, it allows Ireland to benefit from scale of data, scale of knowledge, scale of expertise, what we could never achieve on our own. It's back to that collaboration piece, isn't it? For me as a clinician, and for us, I suspect, as part of that rare disease ecosystem, it levels the playing field.
Great. You've all mentioned the importance of involving patients and the lived experience. I suppose, Avril, from your perspective, what does good public and patient involvement, or PPI, look like in this space, in the rare disease space?
Yeah, so in the past, researchers may have reached out to patient communities to tell them about their results, for example, and that was considered quite good. Now we have a different level of expectation, because what we've realised, of course, is that if you don't ask the people that the research is intended to help, you may end up going down a wrong track, a not helpful track. And so good PPI really means that deeper level of engagement. We often say involvement rather than engagement. And it starts with listening and building relationships. And I guess the starting point is often that prioritization phase. What do patients actually want from research? You know, Gráinne said earlier that it's not always about the cure. Now, can be, but often people want research that's going to help with their day-to-day issues. And so by really listening and understanding what they want, as the HRB have been doing really, really well, then you can direct the money that way, and then you involve the patients all the way through the research, through the dissemination, and ultimately, hopefully, through it having impact. Not just sitting in a peer-reviewed publication and not going any further. And the involvement of patients all the way through helps to ensure that that doesn't happen as well.
Great. And you work through the HRCI HRB joint funding scheme. So that's a partnership model. How does that strengthen rare disease research in Ireland?
Yeah, so that's a really interesting scheme and very unique internationally. So through this scheme, our member charities, many of whom are rare disease charities, can access matched funding from the HRB for research projects that they want to fund. So the matched funding piece is really interesting, because you can imagine how difficult it is for a small, sometimes voluntary patient organisation to raise funds for research, and then how expensive research is. I remember when I moved to a patient organisation, sitting beside fundraisers and seeing how hard they had to work for that money. And so they often want to fund research because, again, rare diseases, the answers aren't there, the treatments aren't there. And so this is a way that they can leverage that bit of funding they have. And usually it's 50-50, but actually for very small charities, mostly rare diseases, they can actually get 75% from the HRB. So there's that side of it. There's also the side that through that scheme, they can fund research anywhere in the world, because, again, the expertise is not always in Ireland. And it gives a layer of credibility to the research that's funded, because it has to go through the HRB world-class processes for funding research.
Very good. And that's been going for what, about 10 years now, is it?
No, more actually. I think it was 2006.
Oh, wow. Gosh, time flies.
Yeah.
It really does. Gavin, I just wanted to ask you quickly about going back to the genomics area, which is, as we know, so important in rare diseases research. What kind of developments have there been at a national level in terms of strategizing around genomics?
Yeah, there is huge work ongoing at national level. So there is the National Genomic Strategy, which has been implemented, and that's established the National Genetics and Genomics Office within the HSE, and they're going to look at enrolling the actual rollout of clinical genetics and how that will work and how it'll operate. From a rare disease perspective as well, they've also launched the National Rare Disease Test Directory, and what that's done is actually put some format on how to request the tests and to do it in a streamlined and more dynamic way than what was done previously, with each hospital individually sending off tests. Now it's done centralised, and it's done with kind of backing of the HSE, and it's properly rolled out. From the genomics perspective as well, linking into Erdera, one of the key examples for us, and that's why we're supportive of it, is the RDCAT. They're submitting patient data from Ireland for unsolved cases, and they've had a huge benefit of that. So in a pilot programme, they submitted 30 patients with chronic kidney disease, and 7 of those patients actually received a diagnosis.
Oh, wow.
And that wouldn't be possible without the collaboration internationally and getting access to those experts via the European initiative. So currently they've uploaded another 189 patients, and they also have 10 epilepsy patients that have been uploaded as well. So the hope is that the more patients we share, the more data we share, potentially more patients will actually get a diagnosis. And even if there's not treatments, they'll be able to have an answer and know what the condition is, and also link in with other people for support to have a similar condition across Europe or the world.
Yes,
so
and possibly be eligible for future trials as well, should they come on stream. Fantastic. I suppose finally, to all of you, this podcast does mark Rare Disease Day 2026, and it's no doubt a time when patients and families look for hope. And, you know, what we've heard in this podcast even today is really hopeful. The fact that, you know, Ireland is at the table for the international collaborations, that there are developments happening in genomics that's making it hopefully more efficient for people to get those diagnoses that may help them, and that the research is very much involving patients. But I suppose looking ahead 5 years, what do each of you see as the biggest opportunity to improve rare disease care, and what progress might we see in understanding, diagnosing and possibly even treating rare disease? So Gavin, I might start with you on that one.
I got the easy question first. I think when we actually reflect on all the things that are happening, and it is quite exciting, so with the rollout of the new strategy, so between now and the next 5 years, if all the recommendations are fully implemented, that's going to have a massive impact. And particularly from the research perspective, there's a huge amount of leverage that we can actually obtain from partnership with Ardera, working with international partners, and that's going to make a crucial difference for patients with a rare disease in Ireland. So I think it is really embedding research into the clinical system as well, so they're not happening in isolation or silos. And it's really focusing at the end of the day, it's on the benefit and the impact for the patient.
Fantastic. Thank you. And Avril, same question to you. Next 5 years, what are the hopes and opportunities?
Yeah, Gavin has talked about a lot of the things that are quite new in Ireland, and they really are quite new. There's a real momentum at the moment. So we've got this big European initiative, Ardera. We've got the Rare Disease Clinical Trial Network that the HRB also fund and that we have a partnership with as well, doing excellent work in PPI, actually. We've got RDCAT there, and then new strategies. There's so much happening. For the most part, patients don't need to know about that. But what they need is to see a difference on the ground. Mm-hmm. And while that takes time, my hope is that in 5 years' time, there will be a smoother journey that will be aided by all of these things happening in the background, by connecting data, by improving diagnosis and connecting across Europe for better treatments and better care. So yeah, I think it's that smoother journey.
Excellent. Thank you. And Gráinne, next 5 years?
And for us to get where Avril needs us to be, not just wants us to be, ultimately it comes down to collaboration. True collaboration, isn't it? Not just working side by side, but genuinely all of us pulling in the same direction. And I think we all know the instinct, even in research, is to stay potentially in our own lanes, but the future asks us for something braver. And we really need to be bold if we build the environment that encourages connection. And I think sharing, co-creation, the pace of progress can be and will be extraordinary. So I truly believe we can get there if we all pull in the one direction.
That's a super call to action where we can finish on. Thank you so much to Gráinne, to Gavin and to Avril today for joining us. And that's it for this episode of the Health Research Podcast. You can listen to all of the episodes on major podcast platforms and on video on the Health Research Board YouTube channel. Links to audio and video versions are also available on the HRB website at hrb.ie. This podcast is a production of the Health Research Board, Ireland's state agency for conducting and funding health and social care research.